most recently?
Okay, so the two positions where I've changed my position that I can recall, well, three. So the three positions that I can recall are: I used to be much more stringent with regard to legalization of marijuana. I no longer care about that issue, mainly because I see that the government sucks at everything. So I think that there is a solid case to be made that, with regard to the opioid epidemic, the government has a role in preventing people from obtaining substances to which they are addicted and can't get off. But marijuana doesn't seem to me to fulfill all those criteria. I think that it damages teenage brains. I think that you're stupid if you use it regularly, and you should stop. I think you're wasting your life, but I think that people have a right to be stupid and waste their lives if they want to. It's a free country. As far I think that the second issue is with regard to same-sex marriage. I'm still anti-same-sex marriage from a social point of view. I think that heterosexual marriage is the only relationship that actually has positive value that is measurable to society. There may be advantages to civil unions over non-civil unions, but that's not marriage in the traditional sense, which is about production and rearing of children. I've changed my position not with regard to that, but with regard to the government. So I used to believe that the government had a role in regulating marriage. I no longer believe that, again, because it comes back to my original premise that the government sucks at everything. And the government's attempts to sponsor traditional marriage have not only failed, they've backfired, because now you're seeing same-sex marriage enshrined alongside traditional marriage at the government level, which is going to end with crackdowns on religious institutions that refuse to abide by the government's definition of marriage. And that scares me, and I don't like it completely. That is what it is in the Jewish community, right? I have my ketubah, which is my name tag, I mean, I guess it's somewhat funny. And bibs that say, "It's my bris, I can cry if I want to," because that's actually just pure anti-Semitic trope. I think I've been saying for a long time that Milo does not represent conservatism. And by the way, I have no tolerance for somebody who implies that it's good for children when they are raped by adults. So there's that too. So I have many criticisms of Milo, and I don't see him as being a valuable member of any movement to which I belong, and I haven't for well over a year. Final note on that, sorry, before I finish. Anti-left does not mean conservative. Okay, Milo is anti-left. That does not mean you are conservative.
How's it going? How's it going, Ben? So you talked about how you came here 2 years ago and spoke, and how there wasn't really any kind of big protest going on trying to stop you, like you've seen happen at Berkeley, and even here, the 15 people you mentioned were outside. And so I was wondering, do you think that the big political climate change where they're not, like a lot of leftists haven't let conservative speakers come on campus and such, do you think it has more to do with the Obama administration or the Trump administration?
I think it has more to do with Obama. The reason I can say that with certainty is because the first major protest against me was in February 2016, before Trump had even won the nomination. So that was at Cal State Los Angeles, and there was basically a near riot there. They had helicopters flying, and I had to be rushed off campus by motorcycle cops. I felt like a Latin American dictator attempting to escape a revolution. It rose is because that if your feelings were hurt, it was okay to act out. The political climate has certainly exacerbated a lot of that. I think that Trump, it's not his fault. The political climate has not made things easier, for sure. I think that there are other people who I'd be interested more in debating. I think a really fascinating debate would be with somebody like Ta-Nehisi Coates, for example. I think that would be a really interesting debate, because I think I really disagree with Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think that he sees things through a false prism. But I think that he's a more intelligent spokesperson for that point of view than Tariq, who seems to be more of a provocateur to me. But I'd consider it. I mean, if there was some group that wanted to sponsor something like that, I'd consider it at least.
So how would you define the alt-right, and in what kind of objective view could you say it's a minority of the conservative?
And then the statistics. So the definition of the alt-right, there is the colloquial definition of the alt-right, and then there's the specific definition. The specific definition is the alt-right was, I believe, American Renaissance, and Richard Spencer was the creator of alternative right. And the idea behind alternative right is that the mainstream right refused to acknowledge specific differences in races that had ramifications for politics. Is the basic idea that black people were not as intelligent and were more crime-ridden. This is the basic idea of the alt-right. And that culture is inseparable from race, that Western civilization was a creation of white people, and that other people from different races cannot assimilate into this because there are racial barriers to assimilation. I think all of this is not just stupid, I think it's evil. And so, you know, that's the perspective of the alt-right. It's the core perspective. So what happened is that this was always considered a very fringe movement, right? This is like 5 people. It's like, really, I mean, it's a very, very small movement. These are the sort of people who would march in Charlottesville, right? The crowd in Charlottesville is like 1,000 people. There may be 10,000 hardcore members of the alt-right across the country. I know this because I was the #1 target of the alt-right in 2016 on Twitter. I received 7,400 anti-Semitic tweets from the alt-right over the course of about 7 months. According to the Anti-Defamation League, I was the #1 recipient of anti-Semitic tweets on Twitter. So I had a great year last year. It was awesome. But it only came from about 1,100 accounts. It was not coming from a huge variety of people who really believed this stuff. Then the alt-right's definition was broadened. So as the right made what I think is a truly tragic and desperate move from conservatism into just being anti-left, the alt-right started to rise in esteem because these were people who were trolly. Right? They like to troll and they like to make memes. And so what they did is they suckered people into believing that if you weren't an establishment conservative and you liked memes, if you liked Harambe memes, if you thought that memes were funny, or if you liked to troll people on Twitter, that this meant that you were a member of the alt-right. So they sort of hid the ball a little bit. They didn't lead with the white supremacism. What they did instead is they said, we're not establishment. We hate the establishment. The establishment is incompetent. What have they ever done for you? We're people who are fighting for a new tomorrow, and join us. And we hate the left this much. And they would go out and say provocative things, and the left would fight them, and then people would say, oh, well, I hate the left too, so I guess I'm alt-right. I don't like Mitch McConnell also, so I guess I'm alt-right. I know that this was the perspective of a lot of people because in the middle of this, Hugh Hewitt, who's a friend of mine and a talk show host that I respect, Hugh at one point called me a member of the alt-right while I was being targeted by the alt-right. And that's because he thought that I was anti-Mitch McConnell, so I must be alt-right. And I had to explain to him that's not what the alt-right is. So a lot of people were sort of suckered into believing they were members of the alt-right if they don't like Jeb Bush for president, or if they like Donald Trump for president, if they like anyone who's anti-establishment. Sheer nonsense. Sheer nonsense. Right? I was for Ted Cruz for president. I was certainly not for Jeb Bush for president. And that did not make me a member of the alt-right. So there was this widespread perception that the core alt-right was actually bigger than it was because they deliberately hid the ball. One of the people who did this was Milo. Milo went on places like MSNBC, and he said that it's just a trolley group of jolly people who had nothing to do with white supremacism. They just believed in cultural superiority, not racial superiority. Absolutely false. Milo knew better. He was corresponding with the alt-right at the time, and he wrote an entire piece about it. So all of that said, what that led the media to do was then exacerbate the influence of the alt-right because now they had a convenient whipping boy. So now what they could say is everybody on the right is actually alt-right. Right? Everyone who opposed Jeb Bush, they like Donald Trump. That means they're alt-right. And that means that they like Richard Spencer. Well, that's a gap. Right? Just because you like Trump doesn't mean that you like Richard Spencer. So I think that there's a deliberate obfuscation by the media. I think there's some ignorance in the media as to what all these groups mean. And the alt-right remains a very small group. So small that there were people on the so-called alt-right who were disassociating from the alt-right during the Charlottesville rallies. So it's a very, very small group of people who the media keep giving attention to because they hope that we're all like Richard Spencer and not like people who hate Richard Spencer like me.
Hello, Ben. My name is Steven, and I really want to say that you deserve all this popularity you're getting because of the moral objectivism and truth that you preach, and I really think it's refreshing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So my question is, I am Coptic Christian, and all this hatred of cultural appropriation that I'm seeing is an anomaly to me, and I really want to know is why is the left so repulsed at the idea of celebrating culture?
So I think that the left is focusing in on cultural appropriation because, again, this goes back to the idea that we can only identify as members of groups, right? That we can't identify as individuals who can actually supersede our genetics or our environment or the group to which we are born. And so what the left likes to do is because here's the short, artificial barriers fall immediately, right? If we can all take certain things from other cultures are fantastic and better than what's in your culture. Cultural appropriation is the story of Western civilization. It's the story, it really is. I mean, it's the story of Western civilization growing and expanding and taking into account other ideas that are better over time. I think that's why Western civilization is so dominant, is because of things like cultural appropriation.
Hey, Ben. Thank you so much for coming out. My name's Alexander, and I'm a big fan. So I was born in Toronto, and I lived there for 1 year, but I've lived in California for the past 10 years, and I have a dream of becoming a United States Senator when I grow up. But one thing I can't do is become President of the United States because I'm not a natural-born citizen. And this kind of became a bit of an issue with Ted Cruz in the last election cycle. So what my question really is what I don't understand is if I'm someone who's lived in this country practically my whole life, worked here, raised a family here, paid taxes here, and potentially served in public office here, I can't become president of the United States. Even Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State, even though he was born in Germany. You can do anything else, run for Senate, governor, congressman, you know, everything else, but I can't be president of the United States. So my question is, do you think I should be able to become president even though I'm not a natural-born citizen? And if so, do you think that it will ever be the case that that's true one day?
So I do think that that is a provision of the Constitution that probably will be changed at some point. The original rationale for that provision in the Constitution was because they wanted to make sure that the people who were running for president of the United States did not have foreign allegiances. And so the easiest way to do that was make sure that everybody was actually born in the United States at the time. It was the easiest way to sort of weed people out in an era when half of the people were actually born in, you know, Britain or France or other places abroad. I think that as we've moved on as a society, and as there are immigrants who come to the country who are more representative of American values than some people who are born here, I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of this provision of the Constitution lasting, because I don't think that it's been a very good parchment barrier against people with ideas that are un-American becoming president. So I think that the idea that being born in America is a sort of guarantor of allegiance to the country or to the country's ideals, I don't think that's true. I think that you know, we should do a better job of vetting our candidates so that they have allegiance to the ideals. Yeah, I know there are a lot of conservatives who disagree with this and just sort of like the idea because it's there. I'm not one of these. I'm not wedded to it particularly. So if you're a fan of mine, I would be much happier with you as president than any of the last several.
All right. Hey, Ben. My name is Jacob. I know you're a very religious Orthodox Jew. I'm as well a Coptic Christian. And I feel like the aspect of the left is mostly godless, their principles. So I wanted to know, how can we merge politics and God back into society? Because I feel recently it's been, God over the years been really left out. And I think that's why a lot of the liberal, or not liberal, left positions have been taking place.
So I agree with you that the increasing secularism of the United States is the single best indicator for the rise of the political left in the United States. I make virtually all of my arguments not on the basis of religion, but on the basis of secular arguments, because I think that it's a conversation we can have. If I cite the Chumash or if I cite the Torah, then somebody who doesn't believe that is not going to agree with me just because we have different points of authority. That said, a society that rejects God rejects the fundamental premise of an objective moral standard to which we should all be held accountable. And this is a serious problem. It also, by the way, rejects the logical consequence of rejecting the notion of a God who created us and instilled us with free will. The logical consequence of that notion is that we are basically meaningless balls of meat wandering through the universe. And that this concept comes complete with no form of morality. On what basis? A rights construct has to come from somebody's moral mind. Okay, and if you are just legitimately I'm writing an entire book on it right now. But the idea that the idea of reason does not exist from a scientific materialist perspective. It doesn't. It's just different synapses firing in your brain. The idea of mind itself doesn't really exist from a scientific materialist perspective, because how do you identify mind? Right? How do you identify an idea? Where does the idea reside? Why is one idea more important than another idea? All of the fundamental premises that the left has built its entire morality on are built on godly concepts, and now they've rejected God. Right? Even the idea of free will doesn't exist in secular materialism. Right? Sam Harris, who I'm going to be debating on some of this stuff actually in about 3 weeks. I like Sam on a lot of topics, and I hope that we have a good conversation on this. Sam is honest enough in his book about free will to basically say there is none. To which I ask, okay, so why are we bothering with a debate? Right? Because if we're not actually going to be convincing somebody, or if the convincing was predestined from the beginning of time, then I guess that's a purpose, sort of, but not really. So I agree with you. An increasingly secular society has ripped out the moorings upon which it is based, and eventually secular humanism is going to fall into full-scale collectivism in which the majority drive dominates, and that's a dangerous thing.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for coming to hear you speak in person. I'm a big fan, listen to your podcast a lot.
Thank you.
There was one question that you answered a little while ago. It's a little bit out of your wheelhouse, but just wanted to bring it back up because I thought that your answer was a little bit invalid. So basically, you were asked about the morality of killing animals for food, and you basically justified it by saying that killing animals is immoral because I think that human beings have a right to survive and think that we need animal protein to survive as a general matter. I definitely agree that like human beings have a right to survive, like for sure. But like,
okay, so we're on the same page there. Okay,
but it's been pretty thoroughly debunked that humans require animal protein to thrive. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the largest organization of nutritional experts in the world, has basically said that basically a vegan diet is nutritionally adequate at all stages of life, and protein deficiencies are basically non-existent as long as you're eating enough calories. And there's also many vegan athletes that are very successful. So I didn't think that that justification that you made was valid. So I was just wondering if you had any other.
I mean, I'm happy to look at the studies and determine whether I think you're right or not. I mean, like again, I think that.
So I'm not assuming you.
Yeah, no. Listen.
I'm just saying, like, aside from that justification, was there anything else that?
I mean, I do think that there is a fundamental distinction between animal life and human life that actually needs to be upheld. And I don't think that we should go randomly killing animals or mistreating animals. But I think that the idea that a human being is the same as an animal and I know you're not saying that, but I'm saying that some of that undergirds some elements of sort of the vegan movement, which is that human beings and animals are of equal value, and therefore you can't kill an animal for food. So if the argument is that you don't have a need base for food, then maybe that's true. And if that's the case, then I would actually, I've said before, I think that there's some pretty good arguments for vegetarianism or veganism.
Yeah, it's just the fact that we have like readily available alternatives that we
right. So that I think is the best argument for veganism. I think the worst argument for veganism is sort of the PETA argument, the sort of the Holocaust on your plate nonsense. But I do. Again, I think that if we're needlessly killing animals, then I would consider moving away from that. Although I really miss hamburgers, to be honest with you.
Hold it. Oh, cool. Hey, so I had a question tonight. I saw the sort of like 9-point speech you did about the left being fascist and
the campus left specifically.
Campus left, yeah. And so I felt there was a lot of sort of selective referencing there, which I think obviously makes sense. That's, the argument that you're making. One that I thought sort of really stood out objectively that was sort of wrong was the idea that the left was more like sort of prone to conspiracy theories and that sort of idea.
Well, so, you notice I did say there are some on the right who are too. So now we get to talk about the Q&A. So I'm excited.
Exactly. So, what I think of is when you look at like sort of like, like the statistics, like you measure like, Donald Trump supporters who believe Barack Obama was a Muslim, believe that global warming isn't real, believe that the Earth is, 8,000 years old, believe that we didn't evolve, believe those sorts of things. It's like demonstrably higher on the right than it is on the left in terms of like very clearly measurable.
It depends on the conspiracy theory, right? So if you go back to the Bush administration, then left beliefs about conspiracies surrounding 9/11 or about WMDs in Iraq and all this kind of stuff, very high. So it really does depend on the conspiracy theory. And as I said, I think there's conspiratorial thinking on both sides. I don't think that's unique to the left. What I was saying is that on the campus, it's more prevalent on the left than it is on the right with regard to big elements of American society. So I think that you're right. There are a number of, you're right, the polls say that a lot of Republicans say that Obama is actually a Muslim and was born in Kenya, and that's a silly conspiracy theory. Yeah, exactly. The Seth Rich Pizzagate nonsense. That crap is prevalent on the right. Conspiracy theories, unfortunately, I think conspiracy theories have actually become a way of life because I don't think that, how do I phrase this? I think a lot of the right is not actually conservative. And the reason that I say that is because I think a lot of the right has become anti-left, and what that means is that if you're mostly anti-something, you tend to attribute conspiratorial thinking to that group of people. So I think that, so maybe I'm falling for the no true Scotsman fallacy here a little bit by saying that real conservatives don't tend to buy into conspiratorial thinking. But I think that we live in an era, unfortunately, when politics is motivated by anger, and unjustified anger on all sides is being justified by politicians. And so a lot of people have a lot of different conspiracy theories. But let's put it this way. It's not absent on the campus left. It's very prevalent on the campus left. Yeah, ask a follow-up. Go for it.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess, one thing on like, the no true conservatives believe that, I could say the same thing, no true Democrats believe that 9/11 was done by, the Bush administration. So it's the same sort of
No, but how many true Democrats believe that Bush lied, people died?
I think Bush
all of them
did lie that. Right? I feel like there's pretty like you can watch sort of like him saying something and something else, but that's sort of
no. You cannot watch him saying that there are WMDs in Iraq and attribute that to deliberate lying unless you are also willing to attribute that deliberate lying to your own party. Everyone on the left made the same contention, including Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. They all made the same contention. No one says that they were lying. They only say that Bush was lying because that's politically convenient, and they think there was a conspiracy. Here's a more common one that's easier for you, okay? How many people on the left believe it was war for oil? Okay, that's supremely common on the left. If it was war for oil, why didn't we get any oil? So, I mean, this is what I'm saying. I mean, like, I think the conspiracy theories have become, as politics has become more partisan, and as we've looked at each other as enemies rather than friends, we tend to attribute bad motivations to our enemies.
Hi, Ben. My name is Lewis. I'm a huge fan. You're my conservative political mentor. I'm a Daily Wire subscriber. I listen to you every day. My question is, as a conservative Latino, thank you. As a conservative Latino in a divisive world that seems to be going literally black and white on every issue, how does conservatism, the movement, and how does the conservative movement bring about more Latinos to the conservative cause?
So, I mean, I think that it really is a matter of promulgating perspectives that everyone can buy into. So I spoke at the California Republican Convention maybe 4 years ago now, 3-4 years ago. And in my keynote, I actually suggested that conservatives should learn Spanish. Specifically, not because I think that Latinos who don't speak English shouldn't learn English. I think everybody should learn English. But I also think that conservatism's message is not restricted to one language. And so I've been diligently failing at attempting to learn Spanish ever since. But I think that one of the things that I agree with you that there is an entertainment aspect to some of conservatism that says the more extreme position you take, the more popular you will be. I don't think that's right. I think that it's not about the extremism of the position that you take. I think it's about the truth of the position that you take and the strength of conviction with which you say it. So I don't actually think that Donald Trump won because he was the most conservative candidate. I think he won because he said things in the clearest fashion. They may even be the wrong things in many cases, I believe. But he said them in the clearest fashion, and he said them with the most passion. And I think that does make a difference. That's unfortunately how sort of our lizard brain works, is that we respond to that. So if you say the right things with that same level of passion and intensity, then I think that people hear it. So, you know, with regard to immigration, I've always taken the position on immigration that I do not have any objections to legal immigration whatsoever, so long as people are not on welfare and they're willing to assimilate to American values, including founding ideals. You do that, come on in. And what I've always said with regard to illegal immigrants is that I mean, we live in Los Angeles, so if you live in Los Angeles, you know and have worked with illegal immigrants. What I've always said with regard to illegal immigrants is that it is a crime, obviously, to jump the border, but the idea that everyone is jumping the border to commit crime is obviously not true. The vast majority of people who are jumping the border to create a better life for their families. Does that justify jumping the border? Not from an American point of view. We still get to select who comes into the United States. We're still a sovereign land, and we get to decide who comes in. With that said, the people who are already here, we should determine on a case-by-case basis whether the United States would be better with them in or out, and then we should either put them at the back of the line or kick them out. Right? If you deserve to be here, we'll put you at the back of the line. You get to wait just like everybody else. But if you don't deserve to be here, then we kick you out. But we do it on a case-by-case basis. I think one of the mistakes that people make is they're always talking about people in terms of class. So you get this debate. All illegal immigrants should stay, or all illegal immigrants should go. Why? How about the ones we like stay and the ones we don't go? That's the way we do the rest of our immigration program. And I think that most people who are Latino and citizens in the United States agree with that. I mean, Latino people in the United States don't want people who are coming here with bad motives to come here no matter where they're coming from either. So I think that it's a mistake in how people talk about immigration, again, thinking that the extremism of their position can substitute for the clarity and passion of their position.
Hey, so first I'd like to thank UCPD and everyone that organized this event, because I was at Milo, a year and a half ago, and it was an absolute mess, but this was really smooth. So really,
yeah, thank you to the police really particularly. Well.
So as a Jew, I've noticed a pretty concerning rise in either the incidence or visibility of anti-Semitism over the last year or 2 years. Both in the bona fide sense, like the people in Charlottesville and the Daily Stormer folks and all the alt-right folks, and in a much more casual sense from many people on the campus left, like that cartoon at Berkeley a couple weeks ago, all the BDS stuff, and the equation of Israel with Jews and anti-Israel sentiment being essentially anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Which, as someone who has been a victim of anti-Semitism from both sides, which one are you more concerned about, if either, and why?
Much more concerned with the anti-Semitism of the left and not just some on the right. The reason I'm more concerned with the anti-Semitism on the left is because I think it's closer to the heart of the left, meaning that the anti-Semites on the left, people like Keith Ellison, he was almost the head of the DNC. The BDS movement has become a hallmark of the campus left. I mean, it's growing in strength on a lot of campuses around the country, and it's being used as a rallying point, as almost sort of an anti-Western rallying point by a lot of folks on the left. The leftist perspective on Israel is basically that Israel is bad because Israel is prosperous and rich, and it is an outpost of Western civilization in a non-Western part of the world, and therefore it's colonialist. That is really an anti-Western position. I don't think it's any coincidence that when UC students tried to pass a divestment petition, they also tried to divest at Berkeley from the United States, which would have been weird, because then they would have had to float about 100 feet off the ground in order to fully divest from the United States, although we have air rights, I believe. But in any case, I'm more worried about that because by statistics, the movement against toward an anti-Israel position, toward a pro-Hamas position is much stronger on the left than it is on the right. That said, the growth of this kind of alt-right, paleo-conservative, isolationism, anti-Israel thing has really taken a lot of people by surprise. I do think it's a minority movement inside the conservative movement. I mean, even a lot of places that are considered kind of alt-right friendly, like take Breitbart, where I used to work, that's a very pro-Israel publication. Right? Like it's been, I think, horribly friendly to a lot of folks on the alt-right in a disgusting way, which is one of the reasons I've been ripping on them for a year. And one of the reasons why I think Milo is a terrible example for that site. But Milo himself is not anti-Israel, and neither is Breitbart. And so the kind of growth of the specific anti-Jewish movement, I think, is let's put it this way: I think it's more specific on the alt-right, and I think it's broader but deeper on the left. I think there's a select group of people on the right who are really anti-religious bigotry and an anti-Israel stance that is much more dangerous to Jews in the long run.
Hi, Ben. So earlier tonight and throughout a lot of the videos I've seen you in, you've made comments.
Your podcasts, they get me through LA traffic, so that's good.
I'll have to double the length, yeah.
Also, I was a member of the Bruin Republicans when I was here, so I'm glad to see they're still doing these kind of things.
And much bigger now than they were when we were here.
Yeah, much bigger now. It was like 7 people when I was here. I actually emailed you to get another ticket for my rabbi. I'm a member of a local Orthodox shul. He told me not to ask this because I'd lose, but I'm going to do it anyways. It's about abortion.
Okay.
And so...
Yeah, you're going to lose. But go ahead.
Okay, so here we go. Talmudic law states that an embryo is not deemed fully viable until the 40th day. And then Jewish mourning rites don't apply to an unborn child. The embryo is treated as an appendage. And Rashi, which I know you know...
Yeah, this is a machlok between Rashi and Rambam.
Right, and Rashi said that it's considered...
Not to get too abstruse, folks.
Right. Let's just say it's till the 40th day. That's not the moment of creation because, you know, he talked about bones and whatnot and arteries forming. Also, in the Exodus, they talked about how if 2 men get in a fight and a woman who's pregnant loses a child, he owes her the equivalent of an appendage. So my question to you is, you always talk about drawing a line in the sand. Where do you draw the line in the sand, the moment of inception, or creation, whatever? So the line is 40 days. According to Rashi, according to Talmudic law, why not draw the line at 40? Why do you disagree with that?
Okay, I disagree with that because basic biology does not draw any distinction at 40 days. So I think that, you know, Talmudic commentators who are writing in 70 CE are less knowledgeable about basic biology than we are now. They didn't have ultrasounds. They didn't know what was going on in the womb. There's some pretty bad science in the Talmud. To be frank, there's some pretty bad science in Rambam. I think Rambam would have been one of the first people to actually suggest that modern science ought to be taken at face value. That said, even in the Talmud, there's no notion that you can abort at will before 40 days. So there's serious halachic authorities, not to get too deep into Jewish law, but there are serious halachic authorities, many of them, who have talked about the availability and use of abortion before 40 days, and the vast majority decision, from what I understand, is that it is essentially forbidden except in exigent circumstances. So they set a different standard with regard to is it a life or is it not a life, Talmudically, but that doesn't actually change the behavior of whether you're allowed to obtain an abortion by choice before 40 days.
So one follow-up, assuming not that the mom...
By the way, I don't form my opinions. This is one of these issues where I don't form my opinions on secular law based on what the Talmud says, and in fact, I think the Talmud is actually logically incorrect here.
Well, let's just say
which is heresy, but...
Right, but not talking about the mother's life being in danger, because we put that one aside for a second. even Eliezer Yuda Wallenberg, one of the guys who was on the Supreme.
Well, Wallenberg is extraordinarily liberal on these issues.
So then he said abortion is okay if you have Tay-Sachs or deformities.
And he's a real outlier on these issues. I mean, I don't really want to get into abstruse insider Jewish community debates, but he's a real outlier on these issues, Waldenberg. And he's taken some very extreme stances on that, on things like transgenderism. He's taken extreme stances. He's much more socially left than the vast majority of halakhic authorities.
All right, we'll leave it for Shul then.
I think it's probably a better idea.
One last thing I just wanted to say. This isn't a Trump shirt. It actually says Seinfeld Costanza.
Oh, no, I can read it from there, and I'm all for it.
Just so you know who I am.
Hi, Ben. Biggest and earliest fan from overseas Hong Kong. Sorry for the bad English. Started watching you 5 years back before you became legendary. But somehow I managed to luckily end up in UCLA and have a chance to see you. So I have 2 disagreements with you. I agree with you that a flat tax is sort of moral, but on a practical level, I don't think the middle class and the lower sectors, they're going to do that well, and they're going to have a significant financial burden.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address that? And the second question is, you spend a lot of your time on the Daily Wire destroying the left and dealing with the people calling you racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, xenophobe, Islamophobe, whatever, a lot of things, and then who put you in danger as well. I have the unpopular opinion this is actually a very good thing, because like back in Hong Kong, it's like 16% people talk about poverty, or today there's an earthquake in Iran, Iraq that killed 500 people. I don't think like many people know about this. So why do you have such a I would say a disproportionate level of outrage at issues that aren't that much on the Daily Wire?
Okay, well, I mean, I think that the issues with regard to the for the same reason that I'm outraged when someone steals a car a mile away from me. I'm more outraged when someone breaks into my house and starts robbing my fridge. And the left is seeking to destroy a lot of the foundational values that I think the country stands for, and that's happening in real time to the most powerful country on earth. And as America goes, so goes the future of the planet. So that's why I spend a disproportionate amount of time fighting what I think are bad ideas. By the way, on the left and also on places like the alt-right. As far as the first question. Which remind me, the first question.
The flat taxes.
Flat tax. Okay, so the flat tax question. So I've said that I think a flat tax is moral because I think percentages are percentages. But as far as the efficacy of a flat tax, one of the suggestions has been that there should be basically an elimination of all tax for people below a certain level, and then a flat tax from there on up. I don't think that's completely wrong. I think that's acceptable. But again, I think that the idea of a progressive tax where you pay more the more you make is both immoral and also bad economics. So.
Thank you.
Hey Ben, huge fan and proud owner of a Tumblr.
Then you know the glories, don't you?
Yes, I do. But I work at a middle school where I see teachers day in and day out praise the leftist way of thinking and bash the conservative way of thinking. And I just want to know what you suggest I would do to not necessarily promote conservatism, but to just kind of keep a objective viewpoint with teaching the kids.
I mean, so I think that the question is sort of two-part, even though it really isn't. The first part is how do you do this without getting fired? Right? I mean, that really is the question. One of the big problems at the public school level is that in California, you have to be a member of the teachers union to teach in a public school, and that's a disaster because the teachers unions are really discriminatory against people on the right, and they obviously take all your money and they spend it on leftist politicians like Jerry Brown, and it's a serious problem. That's a question you're going to have to decide for yourself. How far can you go without getting fired? As far as what you can say to the kids, I think that it's perfectly fine to say, here's an argument I heard one of your other teachers making today. It's a valid argument. Let me explain where I think it's mistaken. And if the other teacher has a problem with that, then let them talk with you about it in front of the class. Like this idea that you get a free field to say whatever you want in a classroom without ever being contradicted, I think is incredibly stupid. And I think it's damaging to the kids because especially, honestly, I think that one of the reasons that the left is actually vulnerable on campus, even though they seem invulnerable on campus, I think this is true in high schools and junior highs as well, they never hear a good position on the right. So when they finally hear a good position on the right, a lot of them are convinced because they've never actually had to deal with those ideas before. If they had to deal with these ideas and actually debate for themselves whether they're true or not, they get a better perspective on where maybe they actually stand. So I would just suggest really going directly at it and saying, you may have heard from your teacher this. Here's the counter perspective. You can believe that other teacher, but here's the counter perspective and the data to back it up.
Quick follow-up question. I was just wondering if I could get a handshake.
As you see, I'm like diseased. So you actually don't want a handshake, but from afar, I shake your hand. I appreciate it.
Hi, thank you for coming. I was wondering about the actual speech you gave on the authoritarianism, and one of the things that us conservatives are usually defined in our ideology is respect towards the authority of traditional institutions like family and religion, and just traditionalism in general.
Right.
In fact, it's often interchangeable with some modes of conservatism. So my question is, where does respect for tradition end and authoritarianism begin?
At the point of a gun, is what I would say, and the point of silencing other people. So I think that we ought to have tremendous respect for tradition. In fact, I cited this to someone earlier today. I think that Chesterton has a great kind of distinction between the left and the right. What he says is that for the leftist walks through a field and sees a fence and says, I don't see any reason for this fence to be here, I'm tearing it out. And for somebody who's conservative, they walk through the field, they see the fence, and they say, I don't know why this fence is here. I'm going to find out why the fence is here, and then maybe I'll tear it out. And I think that that's the appropriate position to take on virtually every policy when it comes to changing the past. The burden of proof is on you to show that making the change is going to improve society. The burden is not on the rule to prove itself. That said, the respect for authority in conservatism only goes so far, right? The founders were revolutionaries who rebelled against an existing regime, and they were the founders of what I would say is American conservatism and constitutional philosophy. So you respect authority insofar as it is right, but you also don't impose from above rules that violate basic concepts of free will and are not in defense of life, liberty, or property. I would say that's where the distinction lies.
All right, guys, it looks like we have time for one more question, so this is the last one.
So lucky. Thank you, Ben, for being here. Really enjoyed your debate at Politicon, destroying Zenk. That was
well, thank
hilarious.
you for coming. I appreciate it.
So my question for you is, I read about a lawsuit filed against Harvard by Asian Americans in 2014 and 15, saying that basically Asians are held to a higher standard when being considered for admissions to Harvard and other Ivy League schools.
Yes.
The stat shows that Asians have to earn 140 points more than whites on SATs, while they don't show any obvious lacking of extracurriculars or leadership experiences. So do you think that's somehow an institutional racism against Asian Americans? And is that an irony where affirmative action really hurts minority group, which is Asian Americans?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the short answer is yes. I think affirmative action is a racist policy in its general notion. And I think that it does particularly affect Asian Americans. For a long time, it affected Jews actually in the same way. There were quotas on Jews at major universities because Jews were outperforming the typical. And therefore, Harvard Law School, for a long time, had quotas on the number of Jews that would be allowed into Harvard. So yes, Asians, by virtually all the studies that I've seen, are expected to outperform other people on the SATs in order to go to the same schools. And income doesn't seem to matter. I remember when I was in college, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about an Asian American kid who grew up in a single parent family, very impoverished, had SAT points 200 points high, scores 200 points higher than a black kid similarly situated. The black kid got in, the Asian didn't. And that is institutional racism, because the assumption is that if you're Asian, you must have grown up more prosperous or in a more solid two-parent family. And of course, that's nonsense. Everybody's an individual. So yes, I think that when I gave my intersectional hierarchy, Asians fall very low on the intersectional hierarchy, specifically because Asian Americans have done incredibly well as a general group. Now, obviously, there are distinctions between Asian communities. Not all people from the general continent of Asia have equal levels of success in the United States. There are significant differences even between Koreans and Chinese and Vietnamese. But with all of that said, overall, Asians are being discriminated against in the educational system, and that is racism. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's good to be back home.